welcome to the ICSS Sunday morning program at the Neville Proctor Marxist Library. My name is Sharon, and I'm today's moderator. ICSS stands for Institute for Critical Study of Society. We were formed at the Neville Proctor Marxist Library in 2004 to preserve Marxist heritage and to support struggles for social justice and the struggle for socialism leading to communism. The opinions expressed in our forum are only of its authors, but we all are united in our respect for the work of Karl Marx, who in his 11th thesis on Feuerbach said, "The philosopher has interpreted the world in different ways. The point, however, is to change it." For the last year, we have been meeting remotely via the internet, and we are happy to be able to include people from around the US and around the world. Our local attendees have every intention to return to meeting in person at the library, but we also intend to keep our virtual participants as well. Today's speaker is Judy. I'm sorry, I'm fumbling here. Here we go. Judy Greenspan, and she is a member of the Workers' World Party and the Peace and Freedom Party, and she's a teacher in Oakland and a member of the local teachers union, Oakland Educators Association. And Judy is going to be speaking on the significance, the importance, and what we can learn from the experience of the workers in Bessemer who were and still are trying to get recognition for their union. And today we're changing our format a little bit, a lot actually. Instead of having an hour of our speaker and an hour of discussion and questions and discussion, we're going to intersperse the two. So I'm going to be asking Judy a series of questions, and she's going to answer them. And you can put your questions in the chat, or you can raise your hand. And so after each question that I ask, then and Judy answers, we'll have an interim of discussion and questions from all of us. And we're just going to see how that goes. Judy prefers that format. We've never done it before, but it's an interesting diversion, a different way of dealing with discussion. So I'm hoping that it will go well. And then we also, though, have to have a break where we talk about fundraising and future programs of our forum. And Judy may be sharing her screen at certain times as well. So I'm going to jump in with the first question. Judy, we know that you're going to talk today about the historic struggle in Bessemer, Alabama, by the Amazon workers to form a union and the national solidarity movement that was built around those efforts. But first, could you please put this whole struggle in Bessemer in a more global context of how the working class what the conditions of the working class right now and how they've changed, and especially from the point of view of trying to organize workers in the United States?
Okay. Thank you, Sharon Rose, and thank you very much to the Marxist Library organizers for reaching out to me and inviting me to come and speak. So my name is Judy Greenspan, and Sharon Rose gave a great introduction, and I use the pronouns they, them, which is a whole discussion in and of itself. I could do another Marxist Library presentation on the importance of pronouns. However, just understand that I I use they and them, and that's what I respond to. If you make a mistake, that's okay, not a big deal. The reason why I asked to change the format is because I am not a professor. I feel like that it's very difficult. I mean, I can talk for a lot, right? But it's really difficult to listen for an hour. And so I feel like the interactive, and I hope it works, of sort of breaking my talk up into different parts, and then also encouraging you, and what I'd like to encourage you to do is to put your questions in the chat. And Sharon Rose is going to go into the chat, and she will pull out some of these questions, and she will use them as the basis for the discussion. Okay, so I'm not necessarily encouraging you to sort of come off mute and start interrupting me while I'm talking, but I'm going to give breaks so that we can then hopefully have a fruitful discussion. And my talk today, I sort of, just so you know, I expanded it a little bit. And the basis of my talk is an article that Larry Holmes, who is one of the leaders of Workers' World Party, wrote in Workers' World. It's called The May Day Manifesto, The Revolutionary Transformation of the Working Class. And that I will drop the link into the chat at some point. And I know that Jean, when it was sent out, sent the link to the article. But that's sort of the basis of the talk. And the talk itself is really sort of framed around the Bessemer, Alabama union effort and what that has meant to not only to the working class as a whole, but to those of us who consider ourselves part of the left and part of the revolutionary left and part of the grouping of people who are trying to build a revolution in this country. Okay, but in order to understand what happened in Bessemer, Alabama, and also to understand Larry Holmes's May Day Manifesto, it's important that we go back at least 50 years and perhaps a little further to the dialectical and historical conditions that have transformed the working class. And in the 80s and in the 70s and the 80s, in the 70s and 80s, I was living in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, which was at that time a very working class town with a lot of factories, a lot of not just breweries, but a lot of car and tractor and metal and welding and all sorts of industry. And while I was living there, I saw the plants were closing. And workers were being unemployed, and at the same time were basically being forced to go into different types of industry. So what I want to do is, in terms of understanding what happened, and so a lot of these, it was a union town, right? Milwaukee was a union town. And I'm not saying it isn't now, it certainly is in the public sector, but in the private sector, it's not a union town anymore. And so I am referencing a book that I'd like to point out to you that's available for download or to read on the internet for free. And do I have it here? I don't have it here. But anyway, it's called High Tech, Low Pay. It was written by Sam Marcy. It was published in 1986 and has a lot to do with the what is, Sam called the transformation of the working class. And because when industry was broken up, when the plants closed, some of them moved down south to non-union areas and some of them moved overseas. There really was a whole transformation of what happened to the working class and a whole de-unionization of the workers. And so the majority of the workers were no longer concentrated in plants or in manufacturing. And at the same time, side by side, was the development of high tech. And so a lot of workers did not make that transition to high tech. In fact, were pushed into low-skilled service jobs. Many of them were laid off. And then there, of course, was the exponential growth of the fast food industry and low-wage jobs. And unions have been shrinking tremendously since the 1980s. Unionization right now hovers somewhere between 11 and 12%. But the bulk of the union jobs are in the public sector. In the private sector, which is a rapidly growing area or a rapidly unorganized area, there are no unions. And in fact, what's really interesting, there's this sort of, is that, last year they said, there was a growth of union jobs by something like 0.5%. But there was a shrinking of union jobs and there was a growth of private sector jobs. So there's this conundrum of what's happening. There are more and more gig jobs. They're not hidden. They're not secret jobs. The fact is that many workers today are working 2 or 3 jobs, young people in particular, and all of them are non-union. They might be working for a catering company, and then at night they're working for Uber, and workers got slammed. The working class, our class, got totally slammed with Proposition 22, which basically said, you work for Uber, you work for Lyft, you're just a private contractor, and you're not a worker. So, which is, really garbage and something that a lot of people are fighting in terms of hopefully in the period ahead. So we know, and I'm sure all of us are very aware, that there was that workers in the South, particularly Black workers, but workers in the South, most of the South right now is a right to work area. It's an area that is heavily anti-union, heavily has a legacy of racism that in the 50s, probably the 50s and the 60s, the communists were basically driven out of the trade union movement. And we know that certain unions were forced to leave the AFL-CIO, like United Electrical Workers. So organizing in the South is a very, very difficult thing to do. And yet that's exactly where the Bessemer, Alabama workers decided to do their organizing. So I'm going to stop here. I know for any comments or questions that you might have about this first part of what I was just talking about. I don't know if there's anything in the chat, any questions in the chat. I know you're probably not even used to this. Organizing the South is absolutely necessary. I wonder if you agree and why. Absolutely. So, the whole basis of my talk, and I will say that, what is his name? Dr. Robin Kelly has written extensively about organizing in the South and has a fairly new book out, I think, called Hammer and Hoe, which is all about the organizing of the Communist Party.
It's not new, although it might be a new edition.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you. But he's been on several webinars that I've seen and has written extensively about organizing in the South and how critically important it was. And it really was, to a great degree, in the 30s, the Communist Party that organized the union movement in the South. And then, of course, McCarthy did his number and drove a lot of the communists out of the unions. Oh, thank you, Mehmet. Thank you for putting that in. Any other questions about this first part or discussion? Okay, so I will say that organizing in the South is so incredibly important. A lot of what I'm going to be talking about today is also has to do with fighting racism as a part of the class struggle. And so when you are organizing in the South, obviously you are dealing with Black workers. You're dealing with the most oppressed. You're dealing with women workers. You're dealing with migrant workers. You're dealing with workers who have not been, no, of course, McCarthy was not alone. But you're dealing with workers that are, for the most part, unorganized. Because remember, I mean, the history of labor in this country does not have a great history when it comes to fighting racism. And the early unions wouldn't even allow Black workers in them, the AFL. And it took the CIO, and then, even there were problems. And so now we have a very different situation. We have a very different working class. We have a working class which is so multinational, which is made up again of migrants and trans people and gig workers. And I'll talk about that. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself because I do want to talk about Amazon. So I see people putting a lot of comments in the chat, which is great. But the story, no, they were still organizing. Oh, yeah. And one of the things, I'll let him in. He's a friend of mine. Okay. All right. So then Sharon, you want to ask me a question? Now I'll stop. Go ahead.
Yes. So the logical next question is, so what does this all have to do with the Union Drive in Bessemer at Amazon, at the Amazon Distribution Center?
Right.
And what kind of solidarity was built and what could have been done better?
Okay. All right. So this is sort of going to be the bulk of my talk. So I appreciate if people, would ask questions in the chat to guide what you want me to say, or you want to make comments, that's fine too. I totally applaud you doing that. So we all know about Amazon, right? We have probably, most of us ordered things from Amazon. I know as a teacher, I ordered a lot of things from Amazon. And Amazon is the second biggest employer in the United States. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry. Jeff Bezos, its owner, even though he stepped down from the CEO, is one of the richest people in the world and owns the company. And just to give you an idea that, many of us suffered, and many of our class members suffered, during COVID and over the past year. People lost their jobs, industries were closed, little small businesses were closed, people were unable to make their rent or their mortgage payments. But Jeff Bezos made $35 million per hour in 2020, just to give you an idea of the vastness of his company. And in December, and there have been, Amazon has distribution centers and fulfillment centers all over the country. And there have been some attempts over the past couple of years to organize. There was actually an attempt in San Leandro at the distribution center of Amazon. And there has been an ongoing attempt at the Staten Island Center, and Amazon workers in Iowa are in motion. But in Bessemer, Alabama, Bessemer is a small little town right outside of Birmingham, and it has a population of, I think, 28,000, predominantly Black. It has an Amazon fulfillment center of about 6,000 workers, again, predominantly Black and predominantly women. In December, enough workers signed union cards, or an interest, and not union card. Yeah, they're sort of like, they're not binding union cards, but an interest in joining a union. So the National Labor Relations Board sanctioned a union election. And it was conducted from December 18th, really through the end of March. Although that's when the voting was taking place. And what's very, very interesting about that union effort is that the workers had a very hard time finding a union or that would support their organizing effort. The national AFL-CIO really was nowhere to be seen. They didn't offer their assistance. It was a fairly small union called the Retail wholesale department store union, RWDSU, that came forward. And in fact, it was the RWDSU is also organizes some of the poultry workers in that area. And it was the rank and file poultry workers that reached out to the union and said, hey, please come out and help these workers at Amazon. And this was in the South, in Bessemer, Alabama, and one of the groups that also provided assistance besides the RWDSU, was the Southern Workers Assembly. And the Southern Workers Assembly is not a union entity. In other words, it is not made up totally of it is not made up of unions. It is made up of rank and file union members and also unorganized workers who are not part of unions. And it's Black led. It's almost an entirely Black organization. And many of them are part of the National Coalition of Black Trade Unionists. And they offered their support, and they helped start sort of the momentum towards building a solidarity movement. But there was a slight problem, more than a slight problem. The RWDSU was up against Amazon, and Amazon does not play fair. You know, one of the things that you have to understand about Jeff Bezos is he is an equal opportunity lobbyist. So he gives funds to the Republicans, he gives funds to the Democrats. He has this big liberal veneer, but when it comes to his workers, he's just as bad as Henry Ford was when he started when he basically started the auto plants and the auto industries. In fact, the effort of organizing Amazon has been compared to the type of effort that was done in the 30s to organize the auto workers. But unfortunately, again, it did not have the support of the AFL-CIO. So what happened was nationally, and I know what I want you to do is think about questions that you have about conditions in the plants or about the organizing effort. And I'm going to share with you the website, because what we did, and we meaning it was really the impetus of Workers' World Party that got the ball rolling, along with the Southern Workers Assembly, in terms of trying to build a national solidarity movement. And it involved, we first called it was actually a national mass meeting on Zoom, because everything had to be on Zoom because it was still during COVID, in the beginning of February, which called for a national day of protest in support of the Bessemer, Alabama workers for February 20th. And the meeting that we organized on Zoom had over 250 participants. Not only, and really, I'll tell you, they were not like, the head of this union, the head of that union. They were rank and file trade unionists. They were people in the community. They were Black Lives Matter activists. They were members of the LGBTQ plus community. They were from the women's movement. They were they were from DSA. There were many, many people from a lot of different groups that came on and formed the basis of this solidarity movement. And so we did initiate, and I'm going to share it as soon as I can. Okay, let me see if I can share screen. I'm trying to share screen now. I'm going to do it. Okay.
It's on.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So what I want to do is, come on back, please. All right. I want to go home. So we formed a national organization called Support Alabama Amazon Workers. And we conducted 2 days of national and actually international action. There was one on February 20th. There was one on March 20th. And there was actually, before these actions, there was a sort of what we called a virtual week of support to stop Amazon's union busting. So I do want to, if you want more information about this website, you can go to supportamazonworkers.org. And we had everything from resources. One of the things that we developed, just to show off for a second, were these incredible placards that we had present at all of our actions. As many as we could make. I guess I probably didn't make them all, but they were quite popular, and they were all over the country, including in the Bay Area. What we did in the Bay Area, I'm gonna stop share now. What we did in the Bay Area is we started an organization, and it grew to, we had about 25 different organizations and individuals at all of our meetings, which was fantastic. And we organized first a picket at Whole Foods on February 20th. And then on March 20th, we went beyond that and we organized a car caravan that went to several sites around Oakland and ended up at the lake. And again, involved a whole bunch of organizations, including representatives from the Oakland Education Association. We actually got, by March, we had gotten the endorsement of the Labor Council, the Alameda Labor Council, the ILWU Local 10, and the Oakland Education Association had come on board, as well as rank and file members of SEIU and things like that. But for the most part, unfortunately, organized labor was not present. And so it really was mostly the left, and it wasn't all the left, because some of the left didn't think it was that important. So meanwhile, I mean, just so people understand, in Bessemer, Alabama, the RWDSU was fighting an incredibly uphill battle. Amazon pulled out all the stops. Amazon hired a company called Morgan Lewis, which has offices in like 33 cities around the world, including San Francisco. We had a demonstration down there. And their whole purpose, they're a law firm, but their whole purpose was union busting. And that's the firm that was instrumental in busting the Air Traffic Controllers Union, PATCO. It was, they've been hired to derail the Fight for 15 union struggle, which hasn't, I mean, it's still going on, but they haven't won yet. And they're up against a company like Morgan Lewis. They also were hired when Major League Baseball went on strike, and to try to derail the organizing there. So, and they're a company, I'm sure, I mean, you can't even imagine how much they cost, right, to hire them. Excuse me for a second. But Amazon has the money, right? So, so let me talk a little bit about some of the dirty tricks, and I can't talk about all of them. And we do have, there's a couple of Facebook pages that I want to draw your attention to that in which you can find some of this information. But one of the first things that Amazon did at the beginning of the union organizing drive is they put up a stoplight in front of the plant. You know how, imagine how long it takes for a community to try to get a stoplight if they're worried about like the safety of kids running into the street. It's not something, you don't just call somebody and then tomorrow it's put up, but that's what Amazon did. They just got it put up to prevent the workers from talking to the organizers as they entered and exited the plant. And they actually controlled the timing on this traffic light. They also, they put up stickers in the bathrooms. They conducted meetings. They actually, there's a video that they forced all the workers to watch, which talked about certain words. They just basically said, there's some provocateurs that are in our ranks, and if you hear words like union and organizing, you should report them immediately to the supervisor. They also did a whole number, they did a whole number about, how, we're giving you $15 an hour, and $15 an hour is a lot. It's a lot in the town of Bessemer, and they have some benefits that other workers don't. But in the scheme of things, in terms of workers making ends meet, it's not. But many of the workers were, unfortunately, because of the whole campaign against unions that Amazon launched, they weren't won over to how much better their life. In fact, how much better their lives would be. In fact, Amazon said, "Oh no, you're going to have to pay all these union dues, and you're going to actually get less money, and you're going to have less benefits, and just stay with us. We're just all one happy family." And we know you don't have to be in the South for that type of brainwashing and disinformation to work. So they did. They lost the election, and they lost it by more than many of us thought they would lose it by, which we were, of course, very upset about, and I'm sure the workers were very upset about. And there was a lot of disinformation that came out about why they lost the election. Everybody wanted to sort of chime in. I mean, our position, and our meaning Workers' World, our position is that we don't blame the workers. We don't blame the union. I mean, certainly, anyone can look back and say in hindsight, "Oh, we should have done this, we should have done that." But in reality, up against Amazon, without the muscle of organized labor, without the muscle of sort of a united, more powerful left than we were, the workers were, they did the best they could under the circumstances. So we don't blame them. One of the things, what's interesting is that right now, so following the election, and I think basically about a little more than a third of the workers voted for the union in the election, which took place over a period of about 6 weeks. So one of the things Amazon did was they installed a mailbox on the property. Workers could mail their ballots. They didn't have to mail it in the mailbox, but they installed a mailbox. And the only people that had keys to the mailbox were the Amazon supervisors. So, and again, videos, meetings, all this stuff. There was this whole campaign of do it without dues. And so a lot of this is coming out now because the RWDSU, when the count was over and they had lost, and I think it was like on March 30th when they announced the final results, the RWDSU filed a challenge with the National Labor Relations Board. And since that time, the I don't know how to say it, the workers have been there have been hearings in front of the NLRB in Atlanta. And these hearings are not open. So we only get word about it when they release the testimony of some of the people who have testified, or some of the business journals have been releasing some information, like Bloomberg and some of the others, and also some of the tweets. But from what we gather, there actually is talk about upholding the challenges of the RWDSU and possibly throwing out the union vote. And we are very much for that. We believe that the only justice for the Amazon workers is to overturn the vote and let the union drive begin again without Amazon's influence or without their intervention, the way they did it, all the dirty tricks that they did. Let me look do you have anything in the chat for me, Sharon?
Yes, there are two questions, and I have a question. And I would like to encourage people to also speak their questions, not just write them.
Good idea.
But let me start out by reading the two questions that I did find in the chat. So, can you compare the successful organizing drive at Smithfield in North Carolina with the failed Amazon drive?
I don't have, Smithfield was what? I don't know.
It was a while ago. Smithfield is
Is that the poultry workers?
Poultry workers, yes.
Sorry, no.
Oh, that's okay.
Let me get my video on. I asked the question.
Oh.
No, Smithfield is a huge meat processing plant in Tar Heel, North Carolina, with very strong racial divisions around Black, Latinx, and white workers. It took 16 years to organize it. It was UFCW, but it's a very, very big company with very similar dirty tricks.
Right.
And an incredibly imaginative organizing approach.
Well, I think, one of the things that I'm glad you said 16 years, because Amazon, the Bessemer Helena workers have maybe been organizing since maybe October, maybe November. And so this was their first attempt. So their position has always been that we lost the first battle, but we're going to continue. But not only that, their union organizing inspired workers across the country. RWDSU, which doesn't have the capacity, barely had the capacity to organize in Bessemer alone, they got over 1,000 calls from Amazon workers across the country saying, please come, we want you to come organize us. So there's a tremendous call out there from the unorganized workers for help. And the real question is, who is going to answer that call? Or is it just going to fall on deaf ears? Because in order for that to happen, there really has to be a monumental effort by not just probably one union. And by the way, right now, some of the unions are fighting over who's going to be organizing Amazon next. That's ridiculous. Right. They should be joining together so that they can figure out how to do it together. So Smithfield, the only thing, the difference is really, and they have a lot of the nearby poultry workers really are the ones who rallied for the Amazon workers, which is interesting. And I think that many people, the fact that they got so far as they did the first time round is pretty phenomenal, but it's going to take a lot more in order for there to be a successful union drive there.
Well,
and I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Judy. I'm sorry.
I see Alan. Should I call on Alan? Because he's.
No, well, I'm going to call.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. You're doing it.
I want to call on myself.
Go ahead, Sharon. Sharon Rose. Sorry.
So the thing that's most upsetting to me about all of this is the AFL-CIO's lack of support. And when the AFL-CIO wants to do something right, they can do it. I remember not eating grapes for 10 years or something. And that was because when the farm workers were organizing, the AFL-CIO had a national campaign to boycott grapes. And that's only one thing that comes to mind. There are many, of course, examples. And what needs to happen is a national campaign of one or more unions organizing one or more Amazon plants at the same time. I remember that people told me how important this organizing was in the South because of the right to work laws. And my answer to that, I didn't buy that. I saw that this was extremely important. Now, for the future of union organizing in the United States.
Right.
But it's not primarily because it's the South. If that were true, there would be Amazon unions in many other places in the North in Amazon, and they're not. So it's more of that there needs to be organizing everywhere.
Right.
That's my opinion anyway. So
can
I'll
I
call
just-
on Alan.
Yeah, can I, before we go to Alan?
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
You waited for so long.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. The only thing I want to say is that it was very important. I mean, it was important on a lot of different levels, but it was very important to the efforts of groups like the Southern Workers' Assembly that have been working for 10 years. They were the people who really came out of the Million Workers March, again, the National Black Trade Unionists and all, and to them, they put all their efforts. And the only place that they're organizing is the South. So the whole, the call to organize the South is very important. To those of us who were beyond the South, and somewhat this regionalism of the SWA created a little bit of friction because they didn't understand, why are you organizing solidarity efforts beyond the South? This is just about the South. And we said, just like you did, no, it's not. It's about all, it's not even just about Amazon. It's about organizing the unorganized. If we live in a country where less than 12% of the workforce is organized in unions, it's about gig workers, it's about target workers, it's about fast food workers, it's about the undocumented. We would say in Workers' Will Party, it's about the incarcerated. You know, the Attica prisoners when they took over the prison 50 years ago. It's almost the 50-year anniversary. One of their demands was a union for prisoners, and that prisoners be paid union wages. So it was definitely a movement that was so necessary on so many different levels. But I totally get, because of the oppression and the racism of the South, that's, you know, a lot of people, that's all they could see.
Okay, I'm going to call on Alan, and then Richard W. is next, and then I'm going to look for more questions in the chat. I think I missed one, but okay. You can, whoever wrote that can certainly raise their hand and ask it verbally. Go ahead, Alan.
Hey, Judy, can you say a little bit more about the other unions' attitudes about the struggle there? For example, what was the justification for those who turned down the offer among the larger unions? What was their justification for not taking it up? And did they comment or stay silent on the effort, the other unions, the AFL-CIO? And also, just another related question, what about the Biden administration and what was their, I know that Biden came out and made a statement in support, but kind of stood back quite a bit too. Can you comment on just in general those areas?
Well, you know, honestly and truthfully, I am not, and maybe somebody else on the call is more knowledgeable. All that I know is that the AFL-CIO, as you know, as an entity, did not express that remotely an interest in organizing the workers. And I'm not sure who else they asked, to tell you the truth. Although I just know that the RWDSU was the one that came forward to do it. And the RWDSU has a relationship to the United Food and Commercial Workers. But they were not in a position, as far as I know, to organize. It was the RWDSU. But I will say that, yes, Biden did say something. and you know, and if I get to, I have a little bit more of my talk that I'm going to talk about in terms of why is the AFL-CIO doing this? And I mean, we can talk about it now. I'm not wed to the way that I wrote my talk. It doesn't matter. But you know, this was a rank and file effort. This was not necessarily also something that they were going to win right away. And in a lot of ways, the AFL-CIO is not a struggle-oriented union. It is a union that has become unfortunate. It is a union of unions that has become very, very lazy and has become very accommodationist. And I think what anything that's going to rock the boat, I mean, organizing Amazon at this point is rocking the boat. It's like organizing gig workers at this point is rocking the boat. Wait a minute, wait, they're not in they're not in our labor movement. This is new. This is something that Jeff Bezos, who exerts a lot of power, and I said, gives a lot of money to people like the Democrats and the Republicans. So to take that on, you really have to be sort of a shit stir. You have to be somebody who is really willing to take that step and be in their face. And a lot of the unions didn't want that. Just like, and also having to do with the migrant workers, Black workers, they're not necessarily top on the list for the leadership of the AFL-CIO. They are certainly not. So I'm thinking of the grape boycott and screaming of the grape workers. The AFL-CIO didn't do that either, right? But I will say the thing about Biden is that I know the workers were heartened that he made one sentence in which he said, I support the union organizing effort or something like that, then did nothing further than that. And I'm sure continued to accept money from Jeff Bezos. So he sort of was speaking out of both sides of his mouth. And I will say that right now, for example, just to give a Biden example, right? Biden is saying, I'm for the PRO Act, all of the, and if the PRO Act had been passed, it would have given some more muscle to the organizing effort in Bessemer, Alabama. But to say I'm for the PRO Act, but then not actively support it. So for example, the Support Amazon Workers Committee, we have a petition out in which we call on Biden to not just say you're for the PRO Act, but to pass it as an executive action, just the way he has all these executive orders, that he could pass an order that would make it easier for the unorganized to organize a union. And that would be far better than lobbying millionaires who are in the Senators Club.
The next person is Richard W. and then Raj.
Thank you. I wanted to address a couple of things. One is that as many of you know, Ann and I are both down here in Austin, and we've both been organizing Texas State Employees Union for going on 20 something years now, Ann? Maybe 30. I have no idea. It's been so long.
Right, and I also have a background in Appalachia, so I've been around organizing.
Right, exactly.
Probably 50 years total in the South.
But you don't. I tried to organize the janitors up in Maine when I was working for a school district, and I had to approach that. I ended up approaching actually the Teamsters. And they didn't. They gave me a couple of bumper stickers to put on and that kind of stuff. But the point is that you don't approach the AFL-CIO, or if you do, you approach them to see who would be interested in helping you organize. And to be honest with you, I got nowhere. I mean, I ended up talking to I don't know, about a dozen different janitors trying to get them and it's tough. And the team's anyways, down here in Texas State Employees Union, we approached AFSCME and they didn't want to take it on, in part because it's resource intensive, and they didn't have the money to really. They didn't see that there was going to be a cost benefit to the whole thing, or at least that's my understanding of it. And so to go out and assume that that it's the AFL-CIO, first off, they're constrained financially, Secondly, I agree that they're a bunch of bureaucrats, and they have other items on their agenda, of which I disagree with. But it really comes down to I think it comes down to a door-to-door organizing, and that's one of the questions that I wanted to have is you have this big national campaign, that span the country and span international, but how much of it was spent going door to door, with members of the Amazon employees and their families. Getting back to the old days, that's what Dolores Huerta did. Was she was doing house organizing, and talking like groups of 5 or 10 people at a time. So that's my comment, and I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. Raj is next.
Yeah, I have a question. What role did the churches play in either promoting this union formation or opposing it? And secondly, associated with that is, where was the greater weakness? Was it among the poor Black workers who are working there, or among the whites who saw the Black could be competition? I mean, this is often done. It was done by Ford. He brought in Black workers in order to break the union, and it didn't work there. I think they overcame it. But give us a little bit sense what you know about that, because among the tactics the capitalists use are various tactics. One of them is in India, for example, the pit Hindu workers against Muslim workers, and they kind of use that. Caste is used and so forth. So how did that either give us a little sense of, if you know?
Okay. So first of all, the workforce, 85% are Black. So even if the 15% of the non-Black workers had voted against it, it would have passed. But you have to understand, the union, and did the union go door to door? They certainly tried with who they had. And the Amazon, there were Amazon organizers, but a lot of people felt, they were worried that people were going to be fired. They themselves were worried they were going to be fired. So it was hard to get people. There was a very, I heard some of the Bessemer, Alabama workers speak. They were incredibly powerful and eloquent, but there weren't enough of them. And you're dealing with first of all, we live in a totally anti-union country, right? And but you're dealing with an area that has a historic, it has historic racism, has historic anti-union sentiment. And if anything, who did they pit? They pit probably the younger workers who had very little sense of unions against the older workers who knew what they were missing. And a lot of the younger workers were not won over. Amazon pulled out all the stops. It was their dirty tricks of saying, and because I listened to some of the interviews, there was this reporter from Payday, Mike Elk, who was very much for the union organizing effort. But he went down there a couple of times and he interviewed some of the workers, and the workers said, I'm doing okay. I don't really need this union. I hear it's really not going to help me. And so, and trying to overcome that, it would take a tremendous effort. I can't even go into all of the dirty tricks. If you get a chance, I'll post the Facebook page. We have a video that Amazon made this like hour-long video, and they would show excerpts to all the workers, and it's horrifying. And a lot of them bought it, and a lot of them just said, "Oh, there's a controversy here. I don't want to get involved." So we can't underestimate. And I will say something about that, Richard. I understand what you're saying about the AFL-CIO. I'm not saying that they would get in there and get their hands dirty, but if they had even issued a statement to all of their local unions saying, hey, We support the Bessemer, Alabama organizing effort, and so should you. I mean, ideally, it would have been great if there had been, work stoppages in support of the workers. But even just a moderate little sentence like that, sort of like what Biden did, but I think it would be a little more powerful from the AFL-CIO. Okay, I'll stop. I see a lot of hands. I'll stop.
Okay, the next person is Jean. Jean, you can unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you. I was just kind of kicking back, just listening. But I really appreciate this, and thank you, Judy, for your analysis there. I just want to say a couple of things. As you know, I am a retired worker, and I still have my dues deducted from my retirement pay. So I think, and I've been involved not as a key organizer, but as a member of the union. And also, as a professor, we were fortunate in that we weren't hassled to the way other people were. So I come from a somewhat different perspective than a lot of people. But I think it's important to understand the huge, well, first of all, the history of labor struggles back there in the days of the Wobblies and before that, when they'd take Wobblies out and shoot them, tar and feather them, all these kinds of things. Was not only the Wobblies, but anybody who dare go on strike also. And there were, and the union movement in the 30s was backed by communists, which meant there was the Soviet Union in the background, which is another huge thing. But, after World War II, there was this giant offensive with that Taft-Hartley Act in terms of banning all communists from unions, which had a negative kind of approach. And as we call it, it's the AFL-CIA. You can't really expect too much from what is essentially a pro-imperialist union. So I just want to make those comments. And, I think it's really important what you're talking about, which is very labor intensive. And I did throw something in there about DSA, because I'm not sure what they did in terms of the Bessemer strike, the Amazon strike. But they were out for the Oakland teachers strike and other things. And they have some good ideas, although they have some weird ideas too. So I just wanted to say that. And there was one final thing I did want to say about, in terms of, I'm under the impression that Bernie went down there, maybe AOC too, and spoken on behalf of the union. Am I correct, or is that incorrect?
Well, Bernie went down there. AOC actually, well, I'm not sure if she spoke for Bessemer. AOC did a great action when the Hunts Point in New York City, the workers went out on strike. She had been invited to some ceremonial thing, and instead she went to their strike, rally, and said, "This is where we should be." If you had more politicians doing that, or you imagine Richard Trumka going there and saying, "Yeah, this is where we should be," instead of me at this, fancy meeting or something like that. But Bernie did go down. That was certainly helpful. And I will say locally, the DSA was involved and not nationally, not so much. There were pockets, like in Birmingham. Birmingham DSA was very involved. East Bay DSA was very involved. There were a few other DSA chapters that were involved in the solidarity movement. And DSA has actually, their convention is coming up, their national convention, and they have a resolution, which we applaud actually, calling for DSA members to go into the Amazon facilities to take jobs with the end result of organizing a union. And they call it salting. The Communist Party called it something else. And not that they're not going to make mistakes. I'm sure they will. And, there's no one recipe, but just the fact that they're looking towards organizing the working class is definitely a very positive development.
I think they've been really, they've done some great things. And I'm a member, have been for 30 years of DSA, and I will probably vote at that convention. So I will support that definitely. But thank you very much. This is good. And there's such diversity on the left, I think. Yeah.
There is a lot of diversity, yes. But I will just say that one of the things that we do say, and in this article on the May Day Manifesto, we criticize the left for sort of missing the boat for the most part. I mean, some DSA chapters aside and a few other groups, but for the most part, the left sort of stood aside and did not provide the support that really might have helped the Bessemer, Alabama workers. And we, yeah. And I will say we're not the only ones. There were some of the radical forces within DSA that issued, the Tempest Collective issued a statement which self-criticized them for not realizing how important the solidarity movement was.
Mm-hmm. And I'll just say also on behalf, I think I speak for the other people in ICSS, one of our gestures of solidarity is to invite you and help you get the word out. So
Thank you.
I think, although we don't formally endorse things,
Right.
We're with you on this.
Yes.
You're changing the world. That's important.
Okay, the next person is Dave Welsh. Dave, you can unmute yourself.
Okay, I just want to say a few things in terms of labor support. The San Francisco Labor Council also came out early in support of the Amazon workers in February. And also my union, the letter carriers union in the San Francisco Bay Area, Local 214, also came out with a good statement about supporting the Amazon workers. So it wasn't a total desert. The other thing I wanted to say is that it slipped my mind what else I was going to say, so I'll have to come back.
Okay. Raise your hand again. I'll call on you again.
All right.
So, I don't see any new people raising their hands, so I'm going to call on Richard W. and then Ann. Go ahead, Richard.
Yeah, I wanted to come back and address this question of the AFL-CIO thing again, because I participated in an action in support of, I believe it was United Mine Workers. The machinists over in Houston were on strike against, I think it was American Airlines. This is about 20 or 30 years ago. And something to bear in mind is that the AFL-CIO is often conflicted, as an organization. And so what happened is we ran into opposition from other labor organizations, in particular, I believe it was the iron workers who were doing construction at the airport at the time. And they were opposed to taking on the supporting the strike, and so what they did was they gave bad directions to people. One of the tactics was to shut down the we shut off our cars, our engines, and walked away and couldn't find the keys. And these guys were over there dragging the cars off of the thing, So the point is that, once again, getting back to the AFL-CIO, a lot of times it's conflicted because it's got to mediate between different organizations, and to think that they're going to come out and offer you support or rejection. It's wishful thinking, I think. Thanks.
Ann, you're next.
Okay, so I'm a little bit like David. I immediately, the moment I open my mouth, I forget what I was going to say. So David, if you remembered, I'm really happy to give you the floor so that you can go on.
Go ahead. No problem.
David, do you want to wait, or would you like to go ahead of me?
Okay. Well, what I was going to say is that this area of Birmingham, Alabama area was a fertile ground in the 1930s for organizing by the Communist Party and maybe some other leftist organizations, but in which this was the Bessemer is famous for being part of this process of making steel, and they had organized the steel industry, coal mining, and some other industries in that area. And I don't really know for sure why they're no longer there, but it probably had something to do with runaway shops and things involving the global changes in the global economy and moving steel to more low-wage areas than the United States. But I don't know that for a fact. But it was it was an area that had somebody's uncle or grandfather might have been involved, might have been a union member in those areas. So, it's not as if, of course, a lot of the new workers, they may not know anything about this. I don't know. But certainly this couldn't have been a totally foreign concept, because if there was this heavy organizing in the 1930s, the other thing is the retail, wholesale, and department store union itself had organized poultry workers in the Bessemer area. And some of the, Judy mentioned this, but a couple of the workers who were poultry workers came and stood outside the Bessemer plant and agitated the workers to join the union. So this is another factor that, in other words, it's not a totally non-union area. I mean, it's got these unionized poultry plants in that area. So there's a lot of different factors here. Thank you.
I'm so glad I yielded the floor to you, Dave, because I was going to say some of exactly the same things. And you're right, it was runaway shops that the steel industries left the U.S. South. I mean, in part, most of the plants, just as textile, went further south. I mean, they didn't stop in the U.S. South. They just kept going. There's still a lot of auto, and a fair, it's not completely a wasteland. But I think there are so many stereotypes of Northerners about what Southern workers are and what the union history is in the South. It's a very important history, and it's very important that we organize the South, mainly because if we're going to look at racialized capitalism, we've got to look at the U.S. South. I mean, it's that simple. If we don't look at it, we're not being good socialists, to be honest with you, or good leftists of various kinds. The idea of assault is, I've seen successful assaults, and DSA's idea of assault is a little delusional. Assaults are generally the effective ones are people that are workers from other plants that are organized, that go into a plant that is unorganized and build union solidarity within that plant, and bring the resources of other plants that are unionized to that plant. It's a very important idea in union organizing. It's been done for years and years. DSA's understanding is of the question of communists or socialists or folks on the left going in who might be, kind of privileged folks going into plants. And we did that in the new communist movement, right? We all did that in the new left. A lot of us did. Went into plants. I mean, I worked in a sewing factory. I worked in a furniture factory. And and basically the rule was you stick around there for a very long time. It's not a temporary campaign-oriented commitment. It can take years and years. And there's a very interesting series that actually DSA has been doing with socialists that went into plants and stuck around. And there are a couple of ideas here. One is you swim like a fish in that plant. You're a fish in the sea of workers there. And you have to figure out ways to be part of that working class in that place. The other thing is eyes open, mouth shut for 6 months. Absolutely. I really believe that one. And that's what I tried to do. Now, the final thing I have to say is I think that as leftists, we have to believe in self-organization. And all the support in the world is not going to change what workers themselves have decided to do. And that's right. And so I think that we can provide a great deal of resources and so forth, but we really have to look at these communities. In the case of the Amazon workers, that community is a very interesting community that we cannot underestimate. And there's absolutely no reason why it won't continue to organize and try to develop some kind of control over what's going on in that Amazon plant. So I see this as very hopeful. I see this as very long-term. And I think it's very important that we, in everything that we do, try to emphasize that local workforce and that local community. For me, the Great Boycott wasn't very successful. The campaign against pesticides in the field, on the other hand, was a really important campaign.
Thank you. Goulden, please unmute yourself.
Hi. Hi, everyone. I had read an article a while ago about an Amazon worker testifying before Senate Budget Committee on the invitation of Bernie Sanders. I guess Bernie also invited Jeff Bezos there, but he declined the invitation at that time. I believe what this Amazon worker said in front of the budget committee is very important in terms of realizing why Amazon workers, organizing under a union. She said that I was very impressed and surprised that she said Amazon has so many, high-tech elevators, and Amazon still makes workers just climb up 4 flights on the stairs. And also some other stuff that she said, for example, the monitoring workers. There is a program called time off task that Amazon is monitoring workers, that every time they slow on the computers and stuff like that, they monitor workers. They even pull up and do one-on-ones with about these time off tasks because they are slowing down the production. And these are some amazing things that, like, for example, she said, Amazon brags about it pays workers about minimum wage, but they don't say what kind of work those minimum wage jobs are. These are so many.
But all of a sudden, on February 12th, a huge.
What is that? Oh. Okay.
Go
ahead.
That one makes one realizes that Amazon workers should organize under a union. I guess that's all I want to say.
Thank you. Eugene.
Yeah, I just wanted to remind you that at some point we're going to need to do a fund appeal and
Well, I'm aware of that.
Okay.
We'll stop it at appropriate time.
Whenever, just wanted to remind you. That's
yeah,
all.
And there are still a couple of more questions that Judy and I had agreed on but I would like us as Marxists to consider the question, what in trying to build a revolutionary movement, what is the role of unions or union members? I mean, I think that it's, gone without saying today that organizing workers in unions is really important, but why? From a Marxist point of view, I think we should consider that. And I think that a couple of questions that we agreed on would also go toward answering that. Who is the working class, and how do we define working class struggles? Is it just better wages, better working conditions? What is the class as a whole? What are our struggles about? So Judy, if you want to go on to talk about those other very broad questions that we'd agreed upon,
Sure.
now's the time.
Okay. But what I also do want to step back for a second, because I think it was Richard who was talking about some of the sort of like turf battles going on between the unions in terms of, this strike here, this is going to hurt this worker, what we're proposing. And I really do urge people to read the May Day manifesto. It's not really a manifesto. It's food for thought. And it's certainly not an end all be all, and we're totally into any discussion about it. But right now, the labor movement is organized on a shop basis, right? So this shop is organized. You may have within one school, for example, or one industry, you could have several different unions in there representing different workers. And sometimes if you're looking at it, sometimes it's possible that they're so-called interests, short-term interests, collide. I think what we're really talking about, the only way to organize Amazon is not on a distribution, is not on a center by center or a plant by plant basis. It has to be a whole campaign across the United States. That actually has to be an international campaign that looks at how did they organize in this country, because in every other country of the world, where Amazon is, they have unions. It's the United States where there is not one Amazon union. So it really would involve not just looking at it industry-wide, but like I said before, not just one little union, but it's going to involve many unions coordinating their efforts, with the understanding that once Amazon is organized, that will benefit all workers, that this will create a groundswell of interest in unions, and to sort of, and it would stop if you're organizing sort of on, rather than on a shop to shop, but an industry-wide basis or a national basis, there's less competition around some of the different issues. So we also say that it would require a much more grassroots approach, that it could not be this effort cannot be top down. We're not calling on the AFL-CIO to co-opt and take over this movement. We're saying that this is a militant rank and file worker struggle, and that's the only way, but it needs the support. I mean, Jeff Bezos is bankrolling the anti-union drive. Who is bankrolling the union drive? Nobody. Just sort of donations, groups that don't have anything. And one of the reasons, Anne, that we're excited, and we're not saying DSA is going to necessarily do it right, but just the fact that here you have this organization, and they could do so much more, because they boast that they have tens of thousands of members, which they do, but what are they doing? So to have some people say, hey, we should be going into the plants, or it's a positive step. And yes, I'm sure they will make so many mistakes, just the way all of us have made mistakes in this effort to build solidarity. But the fact that they are looking towards the working class, to us, is a very, very healthy measure. And we wish that more of the left would do that. And so who is the working class? The working class is so much different. When you think the AFL, the white skilled worker, they're gone. I mean, they're not gone, but they're shrunk, right? And then you think of the big factories, the factories that that started the Russian Revolution, or that were they're gone. And the working class now, they're it's been sort of, it's on a micro level. It's not on a macro level. It's on a small level. And we're talking about gig workers. We're talking about sex workers, fast food workers, domestic workers, migrant workers, incarcerated workers, women workers, the unemployed, stay-at-home mothers, workers who have never had jobs, and workers who are workers with disabilities, trans workers, LGBTQ, temporary and part-time. I mean, street vendors, tenants, and homeless workers, and I have and unhoused workers, and people who live underneath the freeways. They are part of our class. If you look at it that way, then we have a whole wealth. And there's certainly, and the working class is predominantly, or is very heavily, people of color, Black, Latinx, Indigenous, Arab workers, migrant workers, workers who are not, and those are the workers who, for the most part, are not organized. And that's why we have to figure out new strategies to organize these workers. And one of the things that I just want to raise is the whole issue of, and this is what the Southern Workers' Assemblies have been doing. They have organized, they have said, we're in the South. We're not going to necessarily get a lot of support from the upper echelons of labor. We have some union workers, but we also recognize that the unorganized are also part of our community. So they've organized something called workers' assemblies. And these workers' assemblies have been very, very important they were important for support for the Alabama Amazon workers. They have workers' assemblies in several parts of North Carolina. I'll put a link to the Southern Workers' Assembly has a pamphlet out on how to build workers' assemblies and what it's all about. And it's really about sort of it's like a workers' council. I mean, in a most extreme Marxist sense, it's the beginning of Soviets. It's organizing outside of it because the unions are so small and the union leadership, to a large extent from the top down, is very bureaucratic. It's organizing from the bottom up and including the workers and also including. So once you begin organizing from the bottom up, you begin to realize that when people take over an unoccupied house, when the unhoused take over, like Moms for Housing did in Oakland, that is a working class act. That is something that all the working class needs to support. When the Black Lives Matter movement, here we are a year, right, after George Floyd's assassination. And it's the workers, it's the working class that has the most power to protest, to put pressure on the police departments and on the state terror system to stop these assassinations. And that's part of the working class movement. And it's been hard because the working class movement has only marginally, as an organized movement, I'm not talking about workers, everybody, all the workers have been involved, but the movement, the labor movement per se has only marginally been involved. There has been, the United Electrical Workers, which has been historically much more progressive than a lot of the other movements, and some of the other unions put out a statement shortly after the assassination of George Floyd and talked about trying to organize for work stoppages. Well, wouldn't it be a great way to commemorate the year anniversary would be for a general strike of labor against police terror in support of the Black community? The other issue is sort of like, so what is, so it not only who is the working class, but what are the working class issues? In Palestine, just 3 days ago, there was a general strike. It was in the occupied territories as well as in Palestine, and the Palestinian workers did a general strike. Well, and many of us in the working class attended demonstrations to support the Palestinian people because we are against the occupation and the murder and the terrorism but wouldn't it, what did labor do? Was there any organized response or any response by organized labor in this country. That's what we're facing, I feel like. And that's what we need to be involved in. And that's why to have a group like DSA go into the plants, they're going to come in with some of that consciousness, and hopefully that's going to be discussions that all of us should be having. Because if the working class does not look beyond the boundaries of the United States, the borders of the United States, and the United States holds on to their borders, really doesn't let the workers in from other countries, but is very happy to export the plants and the poor wages to other countries all the time. We need to build that sort of international solidarity. We need to, and it's in other places. You know, the Palestinians were very quick. They did hunger strikes. They did demonstrations in support of the Black Lives Matter movement. They saw it very clearly. In the Philippines, I went to demonstrations, and people internationally were showing solidarity with what's going on here. But we need to figure out a way to build that solidarity movement within the working class here. I'll stop. I see there's lots of participants. I know I didn't totally answer your questions, but I tried. Go ahead.
So I will call on Norma, and then we're going to
Do your little fun thing.
We're
That's
going to do our little break thing. But go ahead, Norma. You can unmute yourself.
Hi, Judy.
Hi, Norma.
Hi, everybody. What you just said is so central and valuable if that could be taken in by everybody, which we look forward to being able to do. There are people in DSA who are already located in the positions that where they're no strangers to the work that's going on, and the need for the people working there to have an organization to be able to make the demands that we all support, including organizing. So they need an organization that they can take in and say, listen, we're organizing throughout the world. We're organizing throughout Kansas. We're not just organizing individuals separated. That's been a bane of the existence of unions since they developed the separation enforced upon us by the legislation, by the legislators that our owners own. So that's one thing that DSA might be able to put a background to the organizing that a number of people could use on site already, and then develop it from there. Yeah, if we could reach out to the neighborhoods and the people to say, we need a people's organization of all of us, that'd be wonderful. I insist that one of the things that has to go on is at every opportunity we say, we're organizing to build the struggle for socialism. We need to take the onus off of that idea, of that language, together with other people. And other people are ready for it. I'm not saying to impose it where it will be, oh no, but to preach it along with efforts to identify our circumstance as we do organizing. You know, we're here, we're working, and $15 an hour has to be acknowledged as absurd when somebody's making how many millions a minute or an hour. It just has to, we have to say, listen, we're hoping you can get 15 so you can survive, but we have no intention of thinking that that is anything other than an insult on people who work or who don't go to jobs, you know, who stay home and take care of whatever, or who are living under the bridge and don't have the opportunity. So to be more flexible with our language. And by the way, our language, the South is up there. The South is not down there. And all those places that we talk about going down to, there is an intention in the language. And I don't like to see it sorted that way. I like to see a, turn the, there's no up or down in space.
Okay, thank you, Norma. I think we're going to stop and take a little break here. So I'm going to call on Jean first to talk about our upcoming programs. And then I'm going to ask Richard Fallenbaum to talk about why we need money. Jean, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we have all our programs are listed on the mailing that we sent out. So you should have them there. But next week, May 30th, we have a speaker on Israel, Palestine. We've contacted a number of people. We haven't made a final decision on that, but we will discuss this very important issue. Following that, June 6th, we have tentative a roundtable on a topic to be determined. And I would like to see that be the working class, but well, that's decision yet to be made. Sunday, June 13th, communists in the auto union movement. The speaker will be Roger Karen, and I think he'll deal primarily with the South. Is that not true, Karen or Sharon?
It's not only the South.
Okay, anyway, it'll be interesting. And then starting June 20th, we are totally free. So we're still working on that. And if people have suggestions, they can always email us. So, and I'd like to get back on the stack, but
Okay, you are.
turn it over to Richard.
Thank you, Speaker and Jean. We have some need for funds for the ICSS. We have some expenses. We not major, but we're also helping to support the Nebo Proctor Marxist Library, its continued existence. And we hope to be back there for both live and internet presentations. We also have a new website, which required a lot of work to set up, and we're very happy with, and hope people will take a look at. I placed in the chat some information about how you can contribute to the work of ICSS, financially at least, either through PayPal or Patreon, or the old-fashioned ways through checks and United States Postal Service. So I hope people will not forget, not forget to contribute. Maybe spend a few minutes in the while the discussion is going on, and get on your computer and shoot off a check through your bank. That would be very useful to us. Thank you. Back to you, Sharon.
Thank you, Richard. Okay, we're going to continue our discussion, and Jean is first on the stack. Go ahead, Jean.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I have two comments on this. First of all, when we talk about the working class, we have to understand that it's not just unions that are in the working class or an agent of the working class. Political party, if you go back to the Second International, there were strong unions, but there was also the most powerful socialist party developed there, which was able to challenge, the status quo. And that was true also in France and other countries. And there was also a very powerful cultural movement of social clubs and union halls and things like that. So that was a very important component. So the working class is not just unions, it is also the entire class that may or may not be in unions, but it also includes socialist parties. And the second thing I want to stress is that I've done this before, and we'll do it again, I'm sure. But when Lenin and Marx talked about workers of the world unite, he said workers of the world. He didn't say workers of the United States unite or workers of England unite. And I think it's important to take an internationalist perspective and look, first of all, that the largest, best organized, and most effective working class in the world is in China. And I think people have this anti-Chinese, which is not, well, it's very complex and I won't go into it, but we have to take the organization of the Chinese working class, both the Communist Party and the labor unions there, and understand that they've made dramatic improvements. Even the poorest 10% of Chinese working class or the Chinese population has seen a 200% increase in their income. And we know what's been going on here. So I just wanted to throw that out. I know very few people will agree, but I'll say it anyway. Thank you.
Well, I would like to just comment on two things. Thank you, Anne, for pointing out that the reason that Marxists or communists want to organize among union people is that the unions are the best organizations of workers. That's where people are organized. Obviously, it's not the only place. American workers are the most organized people in the world in terms of the number of places that they belong to, and churches and groups to support identity and groups to struggle against racism and the oppression of gay people, and on and on and on. And all the groups that Judy mentioned, all of their causes are working class causes. But as officially organized with, a membership card, etc., the unions are the place where a lot of workers are organized, and so communists and socialists gravitate toward those places, and that's why we think it's important to organize unions.
Can I make a sentence behind what you just said?
Also, I want to add something in.
Okay, let's Judy add something, and then we'll continue the discussion. Go ahead.
Oh boy!
And Norma, you're on the stack.
Okay, so I wanted to follow up a little bit on what you just said, but also what Jean said. Lenin came along and said he took workers of the world unite, and he said workers and oppressed,
right,
of the world unite.
Mm-hmm.
And the Soviet Union, well, when it existed, and certainly in the early days, made a tremendous effort to bring the oppressed nations, and there were so many, there were like over 50, probably more, oppressed nations that, and I think is it William Mandel who wrote Soviet, not Russian, or I don't know, I actually don't go on my memory, but there was an incredible book written about all of the conferences and the congresses of the oppressed nations, and that was so important, and that's forgotten. So I think, and workers and oppressed means the most oppressed of the workers, which has to do, I think, with what Anne was saying about the South, the Black, and that's why the Bessemer struggle was so important. It's not just only organize the South, but our hearts and minds and support have to be with the most oppressed workers. And given the history of racism in this country, they are really very much in the South among Black workers, in the Southwest among Latinx workers and indigenous people all over the country. So their struggles are so important and so key. I did want to just raise, people are talking about, what is the working class, but also what should the union movement, because I'm not saying we should write off the union movement. I am saying that we have to do two things. We have to push the organized union movement to do better, to really organize the class, to really stand up for our class. But we also have to support I believe, all of the rank and file efforts that are going on, whether it be, you know, there are all sorts of rank and file gig worker organizing going on. We have to support that. We have to do it. But I just wanted to, you know, what would the Marxist Library presentation be like if I didn't at least once quote Marx, right? So in 1866, in a piece called Trade Unions, Their Past, Present, and Future, Marx wrote that trade unions, apart from their original purposes, must now learn to act deliberately as organizing centers of the working class in the interest of its complete emancipation. They must aid every social and political movement tending in that direction, considering themselves and acting as the champions and representatives of the whole working class. They cannot fail to enlist the unemployed into their ranks. So Marx was really thinking and talking in 1866 beyond what we know as organized trade unions, because I don't know of any trade union that's organizing the unemployed, that's bringing unemployed into their ranks at this point. And I will say just one last thing is that I retired and now I'm back teaching, and many of us here, I can sort of guess that you're either retired or about to be retired or whatever. And I don't want to make any judgments. Of course, you can work until you're as long as you want, but there's a role that retired workers can play in the struggle of helping to organize. We can't go in the Amazon plants, but we can sure as hell work to organize the unorganized and organize unemployed workers. And is it in Texas? Is it Texas that's ending unemployment insurance?
I think there are other states too.
And other states too. So there's going to be the crisis, and I didn't even go into that. The crisis of the unemployed, the crisis of people who have had a an eviction moratorium. When that is pulled out from under them, and for some people it's already happening, there's going to be a tremendous economic upheaval in this country. And I think we all poising ourselves, trying to figure out how can we fit into that? How can we be involved in that is really important. Retired or not, unemployed or not. That's it.
Okay, and Norma, you're next. And then I think I saw Richard W.'s hand. No? Okay, go ahead, Norma.
So now we're at a topic that broaches what I was going to talk about with the idea of we all are, well, I don't know, pre-pandemic, we were all in contact with a number of different people who are on the verge of organizing themselves into struggle that we support. And we need to talk about that with those people. We need to present the idea of that socialism is about, I'm going to have to start out by saying it, but that we're about organizing to make us all comfortable, which is the exact opposite of how we live our lives, especially if we have to go to an 8-hour day job, which is absurd and a horrible imposition in our lives. The 8-hour day, which is not necessary. There's enough people to work jobs without enslaving them into that formation. Anyway, to talk about what the objective of socialist organizing is, which is our comfort and security, and to say it with people, at least to say those ideas of comfort and security, and you're really not well treated by this social structure, and so on, so that people that are already in organizations that we attend, there's a couple people I know that are part of a couple of Democratic organizations. I'm sure one of them never has said the word socialism in. And she's been there for as long as I've known her, 40 years or something like that. So I encourage development of the struggle for the structure by which we can all take care of us all. Something in the order of let's go towards the benefit of us all and to eradicate our owners, our slave owners.
Okay, well, I think, Norma, you should speak for yourself. I'm a member of the Democratic Party, which I hate.
Well,
I believe communists need to be everywhere. If we had more communists, we could put ourselves everywhere, in the Republican Party as well. So I don't think people should denigrate, what those of us who are working in various elections.
I did not mean to allude to you. I don't know if you know Betty Brown.
I don't care. I don't want to talk about individuals. I just,
Well,
Raj is next. Go ahead.
Yeah. I wanted to ask those here, Judy, of course, as well as Anne and Richard and others who have been, Dave, and who have been organizing, who've been organizers of workers. You know, the 20th century socialism forced Keynesianism on the capitalist world. Basically, Keynesianism was a response. So the state will ensure people will not die of starvation, not thrown out to the street, which is hovering over a lot of workers, right? The situation right now in the United States. But the factories were there. The workers could be organized, working in one place. Today, the situation is very different. People, the employment is for a lot of workers. It's a temporary employment. Amazon is fine. That's kind of like a factory because there's a lot of stuff people working there, packaging, but it's like a factory. But a lot of the workforce, just like the gig economy workers, is not. So the organizing of workers, which is very important, it's not sufficient for a socialist transformation, but it is a very important element of it. So I agree with that. But the question is, what are, in your opinion, has to be the new way of organizing that is not shop-based necessarily, because shops themselves are unstable. Your job may be here today, but maybe shifted to India tomorrow. It was yesterday shifted to China or somewhere else. So the question becomes is, how do you organize? I know that the neighborhood organization concept, which was, I think, practiced in the past and is being attempted again, but is there other ideas in organizing that could bring workers together in so that when a communist party calls workers, then these are the organizations that become part of that force? That's my question to all the organizers who are here.
Judy, go ahead.
Can I go first?
Oh, absolutely.
So I haven't really had time to go into what a workers' assembly is or what the Southern Workers' Assembly has been doing, but essentially they have organized, what they do is they organize a council, and it's not like overnight again, and they start slow. Somebody was talking before about we have to organize on a one-on-one basis. That's how they build it. They have to build, and they have this pamphlet which sort of gives ideas of how to do what they call deep organizing, or whatever you want to call it, where you go one-on-one and then one-on-three, and then you try, it says try to talk to workers from 3 different workplaces, try to bring them in. And you hold these assemblies where the workers come and talk about their issues. And you reach a point, like the Southern Workers Assembly, they have several workers' assemblies operating, mostly in North Carolina at this point, but other places where you have workers from many different, not just organized, not just union, right? Because not everybody's in a union, but you might have someone representing tenants who have just taken over some houses. You might have people who are organizing sanitation workers, or you might have people who are organizing Alabama Amazon workers. and they come together and they talk about their issues and support each other and make decisions based on, what is the critical struggle right now? So we need to drop our little thing and we all need to support what other people are doing. So we're experimenting with that too, in terms of we have a workers' assembly against racism in New York City. There are some in Portland, I know they're developing a workers' assembly, and it's not based on union membership. It's workers based on the issues that they're facing. So it might happen to be some electrical workers who are fighting their boss might come in and do something, but it's across all the issues, and it's based on sort of getting the workers together to begin to decide their own struggles. And you said something about it. This is the organizing workers isn't that essential for socialism. I mean, these workers' assemblies are the first step towards building Soviets. So
Yeah.
They are really important steps that the workers are taking. I mean, I think that all of these struggles are important steps. And as much as the left might think that it can organize the revolution, if the workers don't want it, it ain't gonna happen. So that's why we have to very seriously take a turn, all of us, and everyone says, well, I have been working with work. Well, okay, but what about this group? What about that group? How can we bring them all together? What can we do better? And I will tell you, I believe, and I'm not just being personal, but Workers' World really does believe that we are at a period we believe that at this point, capitalism is at a dead end. In the past, they could start a war. World War II or the Vietnam War would pump up the economy artificially, of course. They can't do that anymore. These wars are not gonna do anything better. And Biden is there, we believe, to play the same role, one of the same roles that FDR did, which is to stop the revolutionary struggle, to be there and be a pretty face and to come on and say, yeah, I'm for the Alabama Amazon, I'm for this and that. But he can't solve, he's got even as an infrastructure bill, which who knows, imagine how many people are going to be fighting over that, including the ruling class. But we have to use this period. We have to be ready for how are we going to deal with the massive evictions? How are we going to deal with the unemployment? How are we going to deal with the children in cages and the borders that the U.S. keeps on closing on people? How are we going to deal with the wars that the U.S. is going to start to distract people? How are we going to show our international? These are our questions. This is what we have to figure out. And I totally agree. We need a different way of organizing. If we're going to wait for the AFL-CIO, they ain't going to do it. Most unions will unfortunately not do it, but the movement of workers, the unorganized, the rank and file in the streets, that's the only way that we've won anything anyway in the past. That's it. Sorry.
Thank you, Judy. Okay, I have a stack that is Jean, Richard W., and Ann. Jean, go ahead.
Yeah, I think neither Richard nor Ann has spoken since I talked, so I suggest you put them ahead of me.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah.
That's fine. Richard W.
But put me back on.
Okay.
Thank you for the deferral, Gene. Raj, well, first off, I'm probably one of the few people here who's actually read Keynes' general theory, or at least parts of it. And to correct something that you said, Keynes was not into it for helping out the working class. His purpose was really to save the capitalist class. Everything he proposed was to support basically he was trying to correct what what Marx observed was the twin horns of the dilemma of the overproduction, underconsumption, so just to correct you on that point.
Richard, just correction. I think you misunderstood what I said.
Okay,
I didn't say that. I said they used Keynesianism.
I see. Okay.
So
I just wanted to admit he didn't really care about workers.
no, he did it actually to oppose socialism.
Yes, exactly.
Yes, so that
yeah,
I never said that. So just clarity.
Okay, I stand corrected.
We're on the same page.
Yeah. Now to get to your original question about how new modes of organizing, which I think we're in a dilemma on that. I mean, there's still this carryover. Like Ann and I are faced with this in our union. There's still a carryover with people are still sort of in the old mode of sitting out there at tables and signing up people, and I like it, to be honest with you. But I mean, we also have to adopt the new technology that I think that the Zoom has presented to us. I mean, right now, we're able to meet worldwide, notwithstanding time differences. And I think somehow that's got to be incorporated in our organizing methodology. How it gets incorporated, I personally think you bring in Huerta's door-to-door organizing with a Zoom, with a Zoom supplement, if you will. Get back into the community and offer up. There are some technological things you can do to facilitate that organizing. So, but that's just my opinion. And in 10 years, there's a good chance that'll change. I'm still old school. And I know how the new school sort of works, but I'm not sure exactly how you bring it in. So.
And you're next.
Oh, okay. I think I'm unmuted.
You are.
Well, I think that we're looking at organizing as something that comes from outside. And that includes socialist organizers that go into a plant and organize it. And I'm not quite clear that it's not more of an exchange. So first of all, I think the model that we're talking about is a very specific model that may not work. And the idea really that, I believe in is that perhaps you come in from the outside, but then you also learn from the people there and you manage in some way to leave with that organization intact and self-sustaining, which is a different model. So I just wanted to say that. I'm in very basic agreement with Judy, however, that this is a question of organizing unorganized people, figuring out ways to work in community with people, finding those material situations. I mean, we're also materialists, right? It's not all stuff up in the ether. It's also stuff like what happens to somebody when they lose their home. What do we do about it? That kind of question is really essential. And I think that's always been some of the basic, really good work of people on the left, to deal with the situation at hand in some kind of compassionate, collective way, and to organize people to deal with it themselves. And that's what I think sometimes is really lacking in our understanding. I know I'm talking very abstractly. I would do better probably giving examples of how I think this has happened in very real ways. The question of movement around the globe, that's been going on for a very long time. There's nothing new there. I mean, that's the nature of neoliberal capitalism, right? Is that whole industries relocate, that people are forced into their colonizing countries, that there's a tremendous amount of precarity and people are not stable in plants. However, there's stability. There is a lot of stability in these communities that exist for generations and generations as well. And even in people that are forced into a kind of a migration pattern, tend to clump in communities, tend to form community wherever they land. And I think that's a critical thing for us to look at.
Thank you, Anne. Jean is next.
Yeah, I just wanted to actually add the peace movement as an important component here, because you think back to the Second International, they were very clear on the peace movement. You declare a war, we won't fund it, we'll have a general strike. Of course, when it happened, they didn't do that, and the working class did support that. We have the same problem now. But I think it's important to keep in mind the peace movement, and unfortunately, that leads to even more splits and problems with the working class. And many people, think their employment is dependent on that. But I just wanted to add that to our list of concerns. Thank you.
It's 12:30 now.
Shall we turn off the recording as we usually do and have a more free-flowing discussion?
Maybe a summary statement from Judy.
That's a good idea.
So she has the last word.
Judy, you get the last word.
Well, okay, I get the last word. Well, first of all, I did figure out how, I always have a hard time with the chat, dropping things in the chat, but I did drop the PDF of the Southern Workers Assembly draft pamphlet on how to build workers' assemblies. And I think it's an interesting read. It's a simple read. It's worthwhile going through it. It's not, there's no be all or end all. And I raised the workers' assemblies, but there are many different interpretations about how they can be organized. You could organize a whole workers' assembly on U.S. imperialist occupation abroad and bring in all the the local activists and bring in all the comrades from the different struggles to talk about what the U.S. is doing in their country, in the Philippines, or doing in Turkey, or doing, in Korea, so there's no be all end all. It's just a different way to organize. It's a different way to sort of empower people. I really appreciate everybody's conversation. You really enriched this presentation, which I've been very worried about, and I'm very glad that it seems to have worked out. And I want to thank Sharon for bearing with my my wanting to change the format. I find the interactive format just much more rewarding for everybody. I think it has to do with organizing too. We've moved past the time where you can just sort of sit and listen to somebody for hours and hours and hours, notwithstanding all the great communist leaders who would give speeches like Fidel and Mao and some of the others that would go on for hours and hours. I think even they would be forced to make short speeches these days with interaction. I hope that I feel like all of the struggles that we talked about are looming ahead, and that we have a lot of work to do, and we should be optimistic no matter what comes forth. And I think there's going to be a lot of economic, like I said, economic, and already, we see it, since, even during the trial of Derek Chauvin, how many Black people were killed by cops and assassinated by cops, and there's no justice yet, and no unanimity of justice in terms of, Derek Chauvin is the, not the norm of what to expect when police kill a Black person. And those of you in the South know that full well. In Texas, I know where they're still have the death penalty and executing people like crazy, including Mr. Jones, who just got executed. So anyway, yeah. So I don't know. I just appreciate your involvement, and I hope that we can get together. You can contact me. I can drop my email in the chat. You can also go to, if you go to workers.org, to our site, you can see all sorts of articles. You can sign up to get emails and our paper delivered in your box on a weekly basis, on your on your Zoom box. And Richard, I have been won over to the fact that, yes, all year I've been actually helping to develop webinars, on different topics, but I think the conversations is what we really need to have, the one-on-one conversations with people. As the pandemic begins to loosen, just keep your mask on and have those one-on-one conversations with people. I think that's what will really change things.
Institute for the Critical Study of Society at the Nebel Proctor Marxist Library receives no corporate funding, nor do we have any paid staff. We rely on the support of working class folks that share our commitment to the socialist legacy of Karl Marx. We continue to need funds to meet necessary expenses. Since we can no longer pass the hat at our in-person forums, please send contributions to our treasurer, either online via PayPal or by check. The PayPal ID is ICSS Sunday, SUNDAY, @yahoo.com, and the name is Richard Fallenbaum. And checks may be made out to Richard Fallenbaum and sent to him at 1225 Nielsen Street, Berkeley, California, 94706. Fallenbaum is spelled Fallenbaum. To donate directly to the Marxist Library, send a check to the Nebel Proctor Marxist Library at 6501 Telegraph Avenue, Oakland, California, 94609, or directly or donate online at www.paypal.me/npml. For information, write to npml at marxistlibr.org, and the website is marxistlibr.org.